So for episode 10, we're just kind of going to go into a little bit more depth into how to interpret the results, how to understand everything. Just kind of going back on some of the things that we touched on in terms of opportunity costs, in terms of the statistical ranges, in terms of that graph that shows life cycle cost throughout time. So pretty much to do that, first I would kind of want to go through this. As we mentioned before, net savings, this is not discounted. So really what we're doing is we're essentially taking all the future maintenance costs, all the future electric costs, all the future gas costs, and all the decrease and changes to those, in not present day dollars. So this is essentially using whatever dollars they're going to be in the future and just summing it up as a total, right? So this gives a little bit of information in terms of how much actual money we're going to spend out of pocket, like actual dollar wise, without actually factoring in the present value. And as mentioned before, the present value is very important because of the fact that if you are not factoring in that, you're not factoring in the opportunity cost and the time value associated with money. And in doing so, you're not really comparing them on a value perspective as opposed to like just a nominal dollar, right? Just how whatever gives me them, like, as opposed to the correct way, like the financially correct way to go about doing it, right? So as mentioned, the operating cost breakdown covers just kind of a breakdown of all the operating costs and how that's comprised of. And yeah, so the life cycle cost comparison. This is another one over here. So this is. Okay, so the one distinguishment behind this is that it isn't actually showing you life cycle cost throughout time. Like if you go and you try to refer these values to this, the reason why they won't work and they'll actually be aligned with this, right, is because of the fact that they aren't necessarily so we are excluding residual value until the very end of the calculation. And this is giving us a summed total, right? An aggregate total. So it's not necessarily just showing us the present value of the cash flows in that year, but it's essentially showing us the present value of the cumulative cash flows in a given year, all the way up from the beginning of the projection period, right? So in 2023, this is essentially showing us what's the present value of all the cash flows that came from this year to that year, essentially, right? And so 2042 is essentially giving you the answer that you would generally be looking for in most life cycle cost comparisons. Like if you look up here, they're both the same number, right? So this is essentially showing you the cumulative thing, and then it's subtracting it out. Whereas this model over here is essentially is showing you the same thing, but it's subtracting the residual value and the moving residual values from this for every period. And in doing so, you can get these really smooth graphs, and they can be smooth. They're smooth only depending on whether or not there's an expected baseline purchase or an expected another replacement over the lifetime. Less than the projection period, right? So if I were to go and select something with an equipment lifetime less than the projection period, such as CRM5, which has an equipment lifetime of 5 years. This is where you're going to see multiple implementation costs. So as you can see here, all these blue rows here highlights every time that there's been an implementation cost. And also there'll be, if there's any baseline costs, they'll also be highlighted yellow, if I believe. And those will kind of show you and indicate every time that there's a new purchase. And as such, that kind of is what gives this graph its weird bumps, right? Every 5 years, there's going to be this new purchase. And in doing so, it changes the parabola because of the fact that the residual values changed, and interest in inflation has changed the cost of the capital assets, and as such, that is why you see these strange graphs. So just going over kind of the highlighting of this, as you can see, these cells are highlighted gray here. And that's just denoting the fact that this is a negative life cycle value, right? So essentially it's just showing all these gray values here are essentially just showing every value that is underneath zero, right? So, and as you can see, these 3 years over here, like 2040 to 2040 to 2042, those are the only positive years that we can see. And as you can see, that is reflected in the graph as well. And going more over to that, I think I have touched on this a little bit in the previous episode, but going into this is pretty important, a pretty important find that wasn't necessarily brought about from this course, or it wasn't necessarily disclosed to us in anything, but I believe it holds a little bit of value just because of the fact that you can kind of gauge when things are going to break even, what direction they're going to break even in. So, for instance, some CRMs, if I could find one that doesn't have a very good, something like this, right? This is essentially just showing us that if we were really drawing this out for a certain amount of time, we could expect the peak, or sorry, the bottom of this parabola to be about here. So really, you can just kind of visualize in your mind kind of just how long this would take to gain any positive value. And as such, it kind of gives you a directional basis, not only just giving you a final value and saying whether this NPV is positive or negative, because there actually might be some CRMs that still have a negative NPV, but because they're just about to break even, and because of the fact that the life cycle graph over here is just about to break even, and the trajectory it actually might be important to consider. And actually some CRMs, because of the trajectory and because of the fact that they have multiple purchases, like let's say CRM 5, for instance, right? So what you can essentially do is given the fact that we have multiple purchases, you might actually want to consider only implementing CRM 5 past potentially 2033, like around this point, just due to the fact that in doing so today, you're going to need to wait until this point. And if you go and implement the CRM in the future, as opposed to today, instead of needing to recuperate that value that you initially spent from the initial capital outlays, you can just benefit off the fact that GHG levies are already that high, and the fact that the trajectory, you're still going to be able to maintain the same trajectory purchasing it in 2026, right? Like you would still be able to achieve that same benefit without needing to go about waiting all this time and spending all this time having negative value.